Well, you know, State of Play takes the expertise and opinions of our panel to dig deeper into the news. And this week, we're going to do that with Margaret Aitken. She is a consultant and in the past was part of Joe Biden's communications team when he was U.S. Senator for Delaware. Steve Martelli is a Wilmington City Councilman. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
You know, there are a couple of things that caught our attention this week that I do want to go over first. And Margaret, we've all seen the photograph from the Situation Room when the bin Laden raid was going down. We heard that the vice president, your former boss, was holding rosary beads at the time when they were being briefed. Is that typical? I mean, is that normal of him? And do you remember that?
Oh, well, I haven't spoken to him since then, so this is just all speculation, but I did work for him for 10 years, and that would not surprise me one bit. I mean, he carried rosary beads with him wherever he went. He had a set of rosaries in his pocket, and I think you know, there was different ones. There was some from his family. You know, he just always had them in his pocket. So I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, he is a very deeply spiritual man. He's a religious guy. So that would not surprise me one bit.
What was your takeaway from looking at the photo?
Well, it was interesting. I knew some people in the room. Our former foreign relations chief was in there, Tony Blinken, who's now national security advisor to the vice president. And, you know, it looked like a very tense scene. I mean, it's got to be enormously nerve-wracking to sit in that room. I'm not exactly sure. I don't think they've come out and said exactly what they were watching, whether it was real time or they were hearing audio. But, you know, that is a very weighty thing which is happening in there. And I think all of them were probably on pins and needles and really hoping this comes out best, you know, for the safety of the men that were in there, men and women. And, you know, I think that it was just really tense, and I think it showed on their faces.
You felt the same way, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to remember that one of the toughest things to do as a leader, and I can't say that I've ever been the commander-in-chief, but as a president or any sort of leader, is send your men into combat and put them in harm's way intentionally, and then you just intensify that by 100 by the fact that your target is the most wanted man in the world. I can't even imagine how stressful and nerve-wracking that must have been.
Well, Steve, you've been away on vacation, much-needed vacation. You went to Spain, but tell us, you actually Delaware found its way to you while you're on vacation. Explain what I'm talking about.
Well, I happened to catch this show on the net, on the website, and I noticed some commentary on my visit down to the editorial board, and I thought it was you know, it was not unfair, but it deserved to have the topic of conversation. I just thought that, you know, my motivation for going down there was simply because I didn't feel that this administration does a very good job working cooperatively with council. And in order to do that, and I remember on this show, this set here, when we talked about New Year's resolutions, one of my New Year's resolutions or something that I wanted to see in 2011 was a more cooperative relationship between council and the administration. And council's trying, and this administration is not. And I'm not begrudging them for going to the editorial board and briefing them. I mean, that's what they should do. You know, kudos to John Rago. That's what John should do, and he should bring his folks down there. But I don't think it's unreasonable to request that same respect to council, so the council members have some information about the budget process, because we're not being told anything until we weren't even told at the budget address, where we were you know, scolded by someone who I wouldn't
well,
have that conversation.
The mayor really came down hard on council during that budget address. I mean, it was good TV.
Sure.
But obviously not well received on council.
I mean, that's more than a budget address. That is a State of the City address as well. You know, and you know, I look back and I think, you know what, pretty good. Was he that smart that he realized that this budget's the worst budget he's ever had, where he's trying to make up a $2 million shortfall that he just created? So, you know, he brought attention away from the budget and started. I mean, it was just disrespectful. We invited him to our house to have a conversation about the state of the city and the budget, and to react that way, I just don't think was very professional. We are at a time in this city where we need strong leadership. We need rational and reasonable leadership, and I don't think any of that was displayed whatsoever. That was just desperation and childish, if you ask me.
You kind of touched on it. You went into a meeting, and some have said you barged into a meeting. What was that editorial meeting that you're talking about? Was with?
It was an editorial meeting, which is not uncommon, and Margaret could probably speak to this as well, where whenever there's some big event like this, that there's generally a pre-briefing of the media for the event.
It's usually the editorial board who's going to write the editorial.
Right.
So sometimes they allow a reporter to come in. Sometimes it's strictly the editorial board. But it's pretty. I was joking with Steve. They're not a fun thing to do. You know, it's not a pleasant. It's sort of like they sit at the table and you sit at the other side of the table, and you know it's a free for all. They can ask what they want, and you come up with the answers. And the hope is that when you walk out of there, you get a good editorial. So. I admire him for actually wanting to go into the editorial board, because typically people don't. But.
Yeah, and you know, and we had a pre-brief meeting with that, and we were handed a one-page spreadsheet with about 10 cells on it, maybe more, you know, to explain. You know, we came up with $138 million in revenue, and the city came up with $140 million in revenue. So you know, there's questions right off jump. But you know, at the editorial board, they gave them, you know, the budget address, all this stuff that council wasn't privy to. And it wasn't like I barged in. I walked into the building and I said, "Hi, is the editorial board?" "Yeah, go on upstairs." Sure. I knocked on the door. John Sweeney opened the door. "Hi, I am John Sweeney." He introduced himself to me, and he said, "Come on in, have a seat."
John Sweeney's the editorial page editor.
Yeah. So he said, "Come on in, have a seat." I strolled in and sat down next to the mayor, and you know, we exchanged pleasantries, and there was nothing confrontational about it. And you know, Mr. Montgomery and John had come down later, and that's when everything happened. But there was no barging in. It was. If I would have been told at the front desk, you know, "You're not welcome," okay.
Yeah. See, because I was picturing a scene from Braveheart where you were taking the
head
big battering ram and then getting in the
That's what I mean. That's the way it was portrayed, and so.
No, it was nothing like
so
that.
he makes a good point. I mean, he's a city councilman, so they deserve that kind of information beforehand. And if you're going to share it with the media, it's politically smart. It's just a reasonable thing to request and a reasonable thing to do is that the council members.
As well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's change gears to the Wheeler case, and Catherine Kleiss, his widow, spoke to the press, which is a change. She's been relatively quiet for the most part. She spoke to Gannett, USA Today, the News Journal. You guys read the article. What was your take?
Well, I think it was probably a smart thing for her to do. It seems to me one of her motivations was to try to keep the story alive, because really it doesn't appear that there's been a whole lot of progress and a whole lot of new information that's come out. So I'm certain what she's trying to do is just to stoke the flames a little bit and make sure people are paying attention to this. You know, when it's an intriguing story for all of us, but that's her husband. So I'm sure she wants answers like everyone else does, you know, and maybe
Anything
this was an
particular
attempt.
jump out at you that was said in the interview that you maybe didn't know before?
Nothing that I knew before, but I think a lot of it that goes to strengthen, again, some of the speculation around it is the fact that she'd made a comment that he would often go down to a garage for an hour, say he's going to park the car, and he'd be gone for an hour and a half. You know, that to me speaks of a couple of things. You know, I think there's been a lot of speculation and thought that perhaps he had some sort of mental illness or some sort of mental health issues going on. You know, to be gone for an hour and a half to park a car in a garage just does not seem real.
Or he had another job.
Or he had another job, right.
Or he had something else.
Something
that's
else,
the other
right.
part of the speculation is because of his history and his background, you know, that perhaps he was involved in some kind of counter espionage type stuff, you know. So it's a really intriguing story. I really do hope they get to the bottom of it, not only for her sake, but you know, we want to know what happened. I mean, it was right in our backyard, and it's a shame.
Do you think we're ever going to know? Someone asked me recently, you know, are we ever going to solve this case, or is it going to just go on so long that it'll just kind of poof and disappear? I mean, obviously from the headlines. And
I think it'll disappear from the headlines, but it'll never disappear. I think it's one of those things that will make its way back. They'll, you know, if it goes for a year, you'll have the 1 year since his, you know, his death, and those sort of anniversaries, if you will. But my experience has been that in cases such as this, it generally takes something new to come up down the line that, you know, whether it be new technology, advancement in evidence detection, or something that comes up out of nowhere, not out of nowhere, or somebody talking about something, you know, in a jail cell or on the street or something like that, that really will be the impetus behind solving it. But I really, again, I haven't been privy to any investigation, but I think those guys and gals really went out and hammered the streets and did everything that you could do right off jump from the beginning of the investigation on. And that's where your freshest leads are, right immediately getting involved. At this point, I think a lot of it's just looking for new stuff, something rehashing old leads. It's just going to be a lot of really grunt work at this point.
Steve, Margaret, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.